In the Gospel of John, in the last hours that Jesus has with his disciples before he dies, he says to them, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments." And the commandment is to love one another as I have loved you. That's what he's saying. But if you love me, you will fill in the blank. When it comes from us, is often said to test, to challenge, to manipulate. I know I've probably said it, you have probably too. At the time, we didn't think we were doing those things. It was just one of those things. Oh, if you love me, you would do this. And often it's said in a joke, but too often it is said in a very serious way. To coerce someone to change their mind or to do something you want them to do. Guys have used it to get what they want from potential partners. Children use it on their parents. Parents use it on their children. And it puts us in a very difficult position to make someone do what maybe they don't want to do. It's not a healthy way to relate. Now, when Jesus says it to his disciples, he's not saying, if you love me, you will do something that will enrich him. He's just saying, love each other. That's what he says. And that's an interesting thing. If we love, we love each other because God has loved us from a Jesus point of view. There are no strings attached. It isn't that it's unconditional, because I always think that's a false statement. There really is no such thing. There is. God's love is unconditional, but there also are things that we need to do. But Peter puts Jesus to the test. You notice that when Jesus goes, he's exhausted. He's had a really tough couple days. He goes to pray, to rest, to take a nap maybe. And he sends them out in the boat, and the storm is whipping up, and so Jesus does what Jesus does. He walks on the water. Whether you want to believe it or not, we weren't there, but I'm going with it that God could walk on the water. And as he approaches, they're afraid because they think it's a ghost, right? That's what the story tells us. And when he says who he is, it's Peter who says, if. He doesn't say, oh, thank goodness you're here, or it's good to see you, Jesus, or glad you made it. How'd you do that? He says, if it's you, let me walk on the water also. Peter was a manipulative person, let's be honest. And his bravado may have been true or not. Real or false. We don't really know. Maybe he was trying to make a joke, a bad joke as it was. And Jesus says one word, come. His test of Jesus falls short because he succumbs to fear. And that's really, honestly, the wrong way to treat a Messiah or to treat anybody. Fear is a problem. Fear destroys us. And yet we live in fear so much. The church also has, for too long, lived in fear, and it has destroyed us. What we've done is we've taken a false narrative and we've put it on Jesus. Instead of really teaching the words of Jesus, and there is some fearful stuff, I know that, but let me get to the point of the love, right? We've made God something to be afraid of. Often, we do ministry in the midst of fear or arrogance or ignorance. We're afraid to not have enough money. We're afraid we'll close. We're afraid of so many things. True love casts out fear, but we are still afraid. And I get that. I don't mean to criticize concern about that, but why are we so afraid? We have God on our side. Why are we so afraid? We struggle with being inclusive. We struggle with change because change often is a scary thing. And the thing about church, and I love the church, so let me say that. I critique it, but I love it. The thing about church is, every church you go to, if you were to ask them, they would say, we're friendly and we're nice. But that's far different from being loving and generous and inclusive. Paul writes in our reading from Romans, he's struggling with the very same things we struggle with now. And what he said to the church was, it is not your place to say who does or does not go to heaven or hell. You and I are not the judges. Thank you, Elliot Werner, because he said that so many years ago. I'm not the judge. Our job is to confess Jesus. Our job is to care for our souls and love ourselves first. Our job is then to help others on their journey, removing that speck after our log is gone. I've said that last week, I think. Our job is to share our story with no strings attached and no harsh demands, expectations, or threats. Evangelism is not about telling people how bad they are. It's about telling people what God means to you, to me, and why it matters. The problem we've had, I think, in America and large parts of the world, to tell you the truth, but I think here it is still presently an issue, is for too long, Christians had power. They dictated laws. They dictated who was in and who was out. And thank God that isn't the case anymore. There are still people trying to make that happen. There's still people out there blowing their horns and saying nonsense. There are still people out there condemning people and trying to make laws that will condemn others. Those people are not doing the work of Jesus. They're not doing the work of God. They're not doing the work of the church. Ultimately, they will fail. Because that's not how Jesus worked. That's not how Jesus ever wanted us to work. It has become really clear to me in recent years that the true sin of many followers of Jesus through all history and today as well, right now, happening as I am speaking, is that we create idols. We have a desire to test and try to control God. We have the idols of nationalism, the idol of wealth, the constant call to God, the demand that God bless America. The news, I think, maybe it's not to you, but it is to some, is that God blesses everybody in every nation. That's how it works. God doesn't bless totalitarians and fascists. God doesn't bless white supremacists and Nazis, but God blesses people, and then people make choices. National borders have nothing to do with God. Think about this nation and how we expanded. From sea to shining sea, we sing about it in our patriotic songs. Manifest destiny. Because they believed truly that God wanted them to go from sea to shining sea. And how do we do it? By spilling the blood of Native Americans, of Chinese workers on the railroad, of Africans brought into slavery, and citizens of Mexico. Our fight with Texas and California, it was all about taking part of Mexico from Spain. We stole land, we destroyed cultures, and then we said God was behind the whole thing. God liked the idea. We keep blaming God for our greed and our desire. Before we can ask for God to bless us, we need to get on our knees and beg for God's forgiveness. We need to see the truth. In the words of the voiceless and those who are crying out for justice, we need, as the church, to speak up, to call out white supremacy for what it is, to banish it and every other negative impulse from our churches, and our political structures as well. We need to confront and call out those Nazis who have infiltrated our nation in insidious ways. We need to call out our elected officials to account if they have allowed greed to guide their decisions, while all of us suffer from it. We have no right to make demands on God. God makes demands on us to love mercy and justice, to allow God's Spirit to wash over us, cleansing us of our bigotry. Be very aware of this truth. Once we say we are God-loving people, God accepts that. But we have to keep doing it. We have to actually be God's loving people. We just can't say it and not mean it or feel it or think it. We're not going to fool God in any way. We confess our faith, then we live our faith, and God help us literally if we don't. We're not going to be perfect. But we have to continually search for ways to do God's work. Because faith without works is dead. You can believe you are being faithful without doing good works, but there is a price to that. And that kind of faith is not alive and present. It's dead. And Jesus was clear that just because you're nice to your friends and family, or even the neighbor who you play poker with, it doesn't really mean much, because everybody does that. It's being kind, it's being loving, it's being prayerful for your enemies, for the neighbors you don't like so much, for the people who you have problems with. Here's the thing. We need to go beyond our natural inclinations of being tribal, of being only about our family and our close friends. Those things are all important. I love those things in my own life. But we have to go beyond that. When we offer bread to our enemies, when we stand against wrong instead of remaining silent, that's true discipleship. That's how it's lived. And that's what we have been called to do. If we test God, if we ignore God, these are problems. And if you're a person of faith, you can't live your faith that way. We all need to find those parts in our lives that separate us from God and each other, and we need to banish them. We need to heal them. We need to find the places of hurt that take us down bad and dark paths. Putting God to the test is a bad idea. Peter found it out soon enough. Now you've heard it. Let's heal ourselves today in Jesus' name. Go in peace.